Hello, everyone, and welcome to an Opus 16 deck tech. This one is called Sophie Summons You. I kind of heard that in the voice of, I think his name was Yakov Smirnov. He was like a Russian comedian I remember old commercials for when I was a kid. Anyway, who cares about that? Well, let's talk about the deck. So thank you for the feedback on the last time I did one of these. People mentioned that they would like to see the card version as opposed to the list version. And at first, I had no idea what they were talking about because believe it or not, I only ever used this one. Well, turns out there's this handy dandy button over here where you can say cards. Boop! Oh, look at that. It actually shows the physical cards. Wow, that's nice. Yeah, I never used that, so maybe that makes me a total chump, but this is quite nice, and we'll use it that way. So anyway, the idea behind this list is interesting because it originally came up as a summoner list, right? So I was thinking of this new, no, let's not do that. We'll do job summoner. So this Riku here, you have to forgive me, my internet always wants to load this slowly. Where is she? Riku, yeah. So when Riku attacks, you choose a forward your opponent controls, you can return it to their hand. However, if you control a summoner forward, then you can put on top of its deck, draw a card instead. It's an incredibly powerful ability, and I love using it in the 10 deck, and I kind of thought, well, what if we built kind of a summoner deck, and then I thought, and you can do, Earth, Water, and Rydia's naturally a summoner, and then, of course, you get to do Sophie things, so it kind of developed from there. So the original version was very heavy on the summoner tribal. So let's do, not category, job. Here we go. Summoner. So these are the job summoners we have. And it's pretty underwhelming. So the original version of this, I didn't want to get too silly with the colors. I know some people have made decks with like this Yuna and all these kind of different summons, but I was trying to somewhat keep it consistent. I like the idea of keeping it to Earth, Water, which is where most of them are. So you lose out on the Seymours because he's obviously lightning. Rydia, has so many cards, and most of them are good, but I wanted to focus on this forward Rydia, so you can't run any of those backup ones. And obviously you've got a lot of different Yunas you can pick from. The Broskas, I feel like, is its own engine, so, the Seymour could be good. And I did have a version where he was in here, but again, he's lightning, and I didn't want more color bricking if I could avoid it. So... But and this Unileska I've just always found to be underwhelming. The job required to cast your summons is reduced by 1 for each summoner forward you control. Can't become 0. And when she enters, you take a summon from your break zone, but you put it at the bottom of your deck, which I guess is good if you're then going to search it out somehow. But I don't know. That just seems like too much effort, especially when, and this card came out in Opus 11, this Rydia just does the same thing, really. Like, why reduce the cost of your summons for having all these summoner forwards? Or you could just have Rydia who can get counters and then cast it for free anyway, right? So beyond that, there's just not a lot of synergy with this whole job summoner thing. Broska can make them cheaper is nice, but there's no real payoff to having a bunch of summoners on the field. Riku just needs to see a single one. Rydia cares about 4 characters, so when I tried that originally, I just didn't like it. It just didn't feel like it did anything. So here's a different version that I like quite a bit more. If you don't know Rydia, she's quite potent. She cannot be dealt damage by opponent summons or abilities. It always becomes 0. So she's a little harder to deal with than your average 2-cost 5k body, which is very nice. And then when she or any 4 character enters the field, she gets 2 growth counters. You may once per turn cast a summon for free from your hand equal to the number of counters you have. So she's got 4 counters. She can cast anything 4 or less. She's got 6 or more, 6 or less. Right here, you can see all the summons we're running. We're running 2 copies of Fenrir, 3 of Remora, 6 of Leviathan, and then 3 Amaterasu, 3 Mistdragon. So there are no 2 costs in here. So if you wanted, this is something you could do with your tech spots. These are a little more high rolly, right? So they have great bursts, but you're going to struggle to cast these naturally a bit more because you got to get it all the way to 6 counters. And this deck isn't like overloaded with 4 characters, so that's by no means a guarantee. So these are definitely tech spots. If you wanted to swap these out for some 2-cost summons, throw in a Kusith. You could throw in Brynhildr if you wanted fire. Water, you could do like a Kuchulain, who he's a 1-cost, or you could do the 2-cost Leviathan. So if you want the ceiling to be a little lower and more easy to achieve, absolutely go with that. I went for a little more high rolling here, but I've liked the way it's played. Amaterasu is the only non-water earth card in here, obviously excluding the light. And there are, on occasion, just like anytime you're running triple colors, even in a small amount, you'll get those awkward hands where you're like, I can't actually do anything with this card. My Rydia doesn't have 4 counters, and I don't have any way to cast it naturally. We do, of course, have some ways to fix that in here. 3 copies of Tyro, just incredible backup, searches anything you want on a burst. I would highly recommend you always search out Sophie if you don't already have it, because there's only 1 copy, and last thing you want is for it to get flipped into damage, and then you just lose it forever. Shantoto is another way to help color fix, which is very nice. We do our run the Sarah package to get our Princess Sarah. I almost always just make this Earth, so I'm then color fix with these 2. If you really wanted to, you could make it Fire. That way you can use your Amaterosities naturally, but I wouldn't recommend that. I would still recommend making it Earth, Water, whatever you need. Now, this list is a little light on the backups, if you notice. I think there's only 14, so let me check the list version. Yep, right there, 14 backups. Set it right there as well. So you may have to play out a little more, not necessarily aggressively, but if you don't see this Sarah, you might not be on a ton of backups, which isn't always how I like to play. However, I do think there are some things that you can just put out early. You're kind of okay putting out Aerith early. You almost want to put out Rydia early, which is nice, just so you can start getting those counters, and she's kind of sticky. And again, the space is so tight here. And so this is definitely something you can tweak with if you take this try on your own. 23 forwards, 13 summons. You could lower the summon amount to fit in a few more backups, because there are times I would really like to have an additional Braska. Braska reduces the cost to play any summoner on your field by 1. That means Rydia suddenly 1. This Garnet becomes 1. Who else do we have? It includes the backups as well. So this Yuna is now 4, which feels very good. This Aiko is now 2. That's very nice. But as you can see, we're not like overloaded with summoners. I had more of him in the original list when it was so summon heavy, but we've kind of pulled that back a little bit. So between him and Aiko, I do kind of like the Aiko for the burst to potentially search out one of them, which, we've got a couple, but you could flip this. You could do Braskas, or you could just do something else entirely. I really like this Unicard. It's nice if you can play it for 4 off of Braskas, but even then, it's always helpful to have a bounce on a burst. And Break Zone Hate is quite potent, especially right now. There's so much Break Zone recursion between the Soirees, Avalanche, almost any prominent deck you can think of. I mean, this very deck itself uses Break Zone recursion. So having a passive effect, you're not waiting for Kadaj to come in. You don't have to use the Mist Dragon. Just anything that leaves that field, it's gone. It's gone. It's gone. It's gone forever. I really enjoyed using Yuna. And then obviously Sarah into Sarah, and Shantoto's there to help you clear the board. So, as far as our forwards go, we have some Earth and Water. Sarah Mobius is just one of the best generic multi-element cards. At her absolute worst, she draws you a card and buffs Sophie by 4,000 power, which is awesome. And then you can make her fight too if you wish. As well as, between Garnet, Porum, Sarah Mobius, Sophie, Orin. So these are all 2-cost water forwards. They can all be revived off of Lena, which is very nice. Obviously, if you need to get Sophie on the field, she's probably going to be your primary target. Sarah Mobius is always good as well. Garnet can be a nice little surprise, because Garnet not only activates something on entry, but she prevents any forward that takes damage from a summon gets reduced by 5,000. So if your opponent is using a Hecaton Kai, or if they're using Brynhildr, she just turns off Brynhildr entirely. Says, yeah, no, that summon now has no effect on anyone. It's again, in the wrong matchup, if they're not using a lot of summons or damage-based summons, it's not going to do much for you. But in the right one, it can be key. And then Riku, as long as she controls any summoner forward. So if you have your Garnet, you have your Rydia, which is pretty likely since she's a sticky one to stick around, then Riku's going to get her on attack, flip onto the deck instead of just the bounce. You could put some more summoner forwards in here if you really want to. Again, you could try to maybe switch the Yuna out, but I have found it to be consistent enough that I like it. And going in with the Riku is actually Orin. This was a late addition I did. But I was thinking about it. So first of all, he's just a magnet, and magnets are always good. If you've got Sophie on the field, if you've got Rydia on the field, and they've got to take these guys out, or Mashri even, they want to get rid of these cards, it's nice to have someone that says, no, you got to target me first. Obviously, it won't work against any kind of board-wide effect, but, if they have to individually think of the bounce deck, if they're I've seen it in Ice as well, is that if you've got Charlotte on the field, it uses up a lot of their resources to have to first get rid of the Charlotte, or in this case, the Orin, and then be able to target the thing that I really want to. Also, it's very easy to get Orin's second effect on here, whereas that if you control a Summoner forward or a Guardian forward other than Orin, he draws you a card when he goes to the break zone. So if Riku's on the field, he'll draw you a card. Bridia's on the field, he'll draw you a card. Garnet's on the field, he'll draw you a card. So I found that very consistent to get that, which just feels amazing that not only do you got to waste something on this guy, I'm getting something back when I get it as well. Aerith is a really cheap way to boost Sophie by 2, which was, again, one of kind of the original concepts. I think I heard it in one of Steve D's videos from YYT, and I was like, oh yeah, that does double buff Sophie, because not only she'll get the initial buff from Aerith, she'll get the plus 2k as well, and then Aerith, of course, can keep coming back to revive. So having Sophie get a double buff is awesome. Even having Rydia, in case they happen to have, Cooch, Aspel, Brynhildr, so they can try to 5k her. Well, again, now they can't because Aerith is going to keep them huge. And in particular, you can do a recall to the old Doga days with this deck. And I did it one time, and I even opened a good hand. I think I opened the Sarah backup, and I think one other backup. And it was like, oh man, this is a good setup. This is a good way to start. But guess what else I had? I had Ursula, Sophie, and Aerith, and I had the CP to pay for all of them. So it's not quite the efficiency Doga was, but you can, and I totally did because I just wanted to. Pitch Sophie, one other thing for Ursula. Ursula comes in, she revives Sophie. Sophie is her only target in this deck, by the way. So now Sophie's at 6,000 power, and then I pitched the other Earth card for Aerith. Aerith is now at and now Sophie's at 10k. So turn 1, I've got 3 forwards. Sophie's going to deal them a point of damage and draw me a card. And I believe it draws you... I went first, so I think it puts you at 1 left in hand. Because you pitch 2 for Ursula, so that's 3 from hand, so you've got 3 left. Pitch 1 for Aerith, so that's 1 left in hand. Sophie will draw you back up to 2, and then you'll start your next turn with 4. And again, your opponent has to do something about that immediately. And I know I went on to win that game because it immediately put them so far behind, and they had to overinvest in something that didn't really do the thing they wanted it to. So if you open those nuts, feel free to go for it. It's a lot harder now, especially with only 1 copy of Sophie. If you wanted to reduce Ursula to 1, you could do that as well. Again, I do think there's some numbers you could fudge here because, so we point out what the Lena can recur, right? All these waters. We also have Fenrir, and this card's kind of fallen out of favor mainly because Doga disappeared, but it can revive Sarah Mobius, Sophie, Rydia, and Aerith. So that's 4 2-cost Earth that can be revived by the Fenrir, and then obviously the water ones can also be revived by the Lena. And then Fenrir can break any backup of cost 4 or more. So if your opponent has an early Kolka, their own Sarah, their Tyro, whatever, against Soirees, if they put down an Amber, and Edel's not on the field so you can break it, you can blast that thing, and then you can take out lighter dark forwards. There's a Kadaj that's giving you trouble, whatever. And it's a really good card to use in the middle of combat, especially if you can do it for free off of Rydia. They go to combat, they think they're ahead on the math or whatever it is. Here comes Fenrir, surprise. Your light forward's gone, or your backup is broken. Also, Aerith just came in, or Sarah Mobius just came in. She made something fight, and it just totally messed with their plan. And yeah, getting to cast this for free off of Rydia feels absolutely fantastic. Porum's mainly in here just for the summon recursion. And it's a burst, and getting to use these summons multiple times is a good thing. Let's see. He's talked about Sarah Mobius. Mashri is, of course, just generically good. She'll reduce... all your summons naturally by 1. So if you do need to hardcast them, Mist Dragon becomes 2, Amaterasu becomes 2, 4, 5, 5. You can even then dump them later because the only recursion is Porum. So it's not like there's an overabundance of a recursion that you could slap in here. So you can then happily, I really want to protect Sophie, bounce her back to my hand with Mashri, draw a card with Mashri, whatever. This card's just absurd. And hopefully it gets banned soon. But yeah, so there's her idea with the summon deck. Riku, like I said, you could maybe go down to 1 Ursula since Sophie's your only target, but I still kind of like 2. It's a nice CP anyway. I'm trying to think. I think that's it as far as everything speaking for itself. So some tech choices you could possibly throw in. Let's look up Kryl. Kryl would be really good, although she's not a summoner, which is a bit of a shame. She is a warrior of light. Oh, yeah. See, no job summoner. So Kryl is warrior. So she won't fit this, but you can enter. She can recast a summon from your break zone or one from your opponent's break zone. And she's also a 2-cost Earth forward, so she can be recurred off of Fenrir. So you could absolutely throw Kryl in here if you want. Again, you could probably take off one of the Ursulas. Maybe if you don't want to invest in the Riku as heavily, you can drop some of the Rikus. This has got 16 bursts, so obviously I always enjoy a high burst count, but you could, again, easily fudge some of these numbers. Kryl, I think, would be really good. If you're worried about coloring, you could drop the Amaterasu, but this summon is just so good and so key. And if you can get the Ursula out or the Rydia out early, and then just one other Porum to get her second counter. Ursula, that was the other thing. Ursula does buff the Rydia counter, so that part is kind of nice. If you can do any of that, then now you can just cast a Amaterasu for free. So it's hard to beat that kind of value. That whatever they try to answer you with, you're just gonna completely cancel it. So it's an interesting deck because I'm kind of trying to do a whole bunch of things at once, right? I'm trying to have the Sophie game plan with forwards that can buffer. I'm kind of trying to lean into the summoner a little bit with Rydia so that Riku can do her thing. And there are times I have felt, is it a little too stretched? Like, is it trying to do too many things at once? Sometimes I feel that, but other times, at least in playing it, it comes together more than I thought it would. Because first I thought, am I just, trying to stretch too much? But there is enough synergy between, again, Lena being able to recur so many targets, Fenrir having so many targets to recur, Aerith double buffing Sophie, Mashri having so many summons she can use, Rydia really just getting to the 4 counters. Like, so Rydia is another point. You could possibly load this up with more 4 characters if you want. Let's see who we've got in Earth and Water. Okay, so if you wanted to load up with more 4 characters, we've got some old Cecils. You could swap the Orin out for this Cecil, but he's obviously not nearly as cheap. He's a much more expensive magnet. I have seen some people actually running this Yang just because he's a 2-cost Urs. He's another one that can be brought in off of Ursula, and he will also buff Rydia. So absolutely, he's a decent target you could throw in there. You can't obviously pick any of the other Rydias. I wouldn't pick any of the Archfiends because they don't do much on their own. I think this is probably the best Porum. You could do the Opus 15 Legend Porum if you wanted. That card is still just very good. Very just generically good and strong in a lot of situations. I was personally going for the Summon Recursion, but that one is an actual good choice. Again, you could do the Rosa, but we're trying to keep backups low. Rydia Scarmaglione. You could do a Luminora backup to get the Porum out. See, backups with the Rydia are always a little weird to me because to get the advantage of that, you have to have the Rydia out first, and then you play the Lenora afterwards. And then if that Rydia dies or gets bounced or whatever, you've already played the Lenora, there's no way to replay it. So she can't be used continually to get the counters. That's kind of why I prefer something like Porum, which can be played and revived multiple times to boost those counters up. Probably wouldn't pick any of these. Again, probably the best cards in here are also named Porum and Rydia. I think the Cecil's too expensive. Again, you could play this backup Cecil just for counters, but same thing as the Lenora. You have to have the Rydia out first, then the Cecil has to come down. And if your Rydia sticks around, it's awesome. It's just got those counters, but they're going to make an effort to get rid of it. So I have considered the Scarmaglione, and in different builds, I actually did use this card. I like that it can be not only back attacked in, it can be recurred from the break zone with Fenrir. Although in practice, if I'm using Fenrir, I'm almost always going to bring back Sophie or Sarah Mobius, maybe even Aerith if she's in there somehow, or even the Rydia. Like, Scarmaglione is always going to be my last target. So, but again, 4 character, you could do a surprise back attack in. Oh, Rydia now has 6 counters. Haha, cast her more for free, kind of thing. So yeah, and again, this Porum's great. You could swap that out for this one if you prefer it. This deck isn't really built for Fusoya, so I wouldn't recommend that. So again, there are 4 characters you could lean into if you want to bump that count, but so I guess this is the benefit of like stretching out the idea a little, is that it's not solely on Rydia's shoulders, right? Just like it's not solely on Sophie's shoulders, not solely on Riku's shoulders. As you draw and as you play the game, hey, I've got Riku out. Cool. I've had Riku put in just work from the very beginning. Sometimes I remember my opponent went aggro one game. I didn't really have a good hand. I didn't have any backups, but I had Riku. So I just put out Riku. Turn 1, she was a big enough body to block their smaller guys. And then turn 2, and I had the Garnet in hand. So turn 2, I think it was Rydia even. So turn 2, I just put down Rydia. Now Riku's online, starts putting stuff onto the top of their deck and drawing you cards. Feels good. There's a really nice, at least in playing it, that I found, there's a nice, enough of a synergy that, again, everyone's kind of carrying the load. Because some Rydia decks, I feel, are so into the Rydia that if the Rydia fails, if they have an easy answer to it, a Famfrit, a Tomos, whatever, the deck kind of falls apart. So I have appreciated about this one is, again, there's a couple different pieces to carry the load. You've got that Shantoto as the backup if you need it. So I've really liked playing this one. I really do adore these Earth Water cards, even if this card was just way too strong. And just the colors on them look so pretty. And it is very satisfying to have so many recursion options through Lena and through Fenrir that you've got so many targets to use. So this is my kind of Sophie Summons You deck. I've really enjoyed it. I hope sometime in the future we do get more for the summoner synergy, because I did really try to lean into that at first, but there's just no benefit. There's no benefit to, and maybe I'm spoiled by Scions, but when I think of kind of tribal synergy, and I'm just going, I'm going way back here, is that Ida was a very appealing card for Scions, because for each Scion of the 7th Dawn, other than Ida you control, she gains 2,000 power. So you were rewarded for putting out more and more Scions. The more Scions you put out, the stronger she got. There was no limit to it. There's kind of some of that with Rydia. The more 4 characters you put out, the stronger she gets. There's no limit to it. Although, again, with Rydia, you also have to have the summons to cast, and her having 12 counters is meaningless if, your strongest summon is a 4 cost. So, if they ever do that with the summoners, the summoner job, which is kind of surprising, it's such a prominent Final Fantasy job, but if there's ever a reason to, hey, if you have 4 summoners on the field, do this thing. I did also briefly consider, I'll touch on Braska's Final Aeon, because Braska's Final Aeon, he does have not only is he just a generically good card, he has a second ability where if you're running summoners, you can just discard him from hand to just nuke something for 10,000 damage. However, they have to be summoner forwards, not summoner backups. And again, I would rather have the Amaterasu for the fire CP, but you could. So anyway, this is my version. Let me know what you think. Let me know if there's some number tweaks that you think you would prefer. I think this one is very flexible in how you do that. However, I do like everyone kind of shoulders the load a little bit play style. So there you go. Hope you enjoy. And as always, talk to you later. Bye.